All right, welcome in, One Giant Podcast fans and anyone who's really just a football fan in general. We come to you here on YouTube pre schedule release, which will be dropping here in just about 15 minutes, a little bit less than that. Andy Makowitz is going to be joining in here momentarily along with us, and we're just going to break it down. We already know the teams that the New York Football Giants will be taking on this upcoming season. You've got home matchups against the Arizona Cardinals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the San Francisco 49ers. You're also going to catch the Cleveland Browns along with the Pittsburgh Steelers to go along with our divisional matchups against the Eagles, Cowboys, and Redskins. On the away side of things, the Giants will be facing the Ravens, Bears, Bengals, and Rams to go along with the Seahawks, and then your usual cast of division rivals as well. Now, there's a lot of games in here outside of the divisional rivalries that are going to be fun to watch because of storylines in and around these teams. Obviously, you think about the Cleveland Browns, that home matchup. It's going to be the return for Odell Beckham Jr. I don't know how much of the factor he's going to be in the ultimate results. I'm not saying because he's not an incredible talent. But as we know, these are team games, and I think that rushing attack of Nick Chubb is going to be one of those ones to watch for during that game. And how does the defense for the Giants respond against it? That being said, though, that's one of the first storylines that we think about as we now welcome in one Andy Makowitz to the live YouTube broadcast. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm trying to sift through all of the random leaks that have happened over the last 72 hours that have been proven false in terms of the schedule.
Well, that's why we get to wait excitedly for 7:30 when it'll officially drop. It was just starting to roll out all of the home matchups that we have, all of the away games we have, and the first one that I highlighted was obviously from a storyline standpoint, Odell Beckham come back to Giant Stadium and face the old team at some point on that home docket. There's some other storylines draft related. Do any of them jump out at you just in terms of some of these games that'll be must watch? Oh, as we wonder, I thought that Andy was just being stoic there. It turns out he was actually being way more than that. He was being downright. I thought you were being stoic, Andy. I just told the people I laid that out there for you for a second. I was like, yeah, come on.
I play a little bit of poker every now and then. I have a really good poker face, and it's when the computer freezes usually. So
I was impressed. Yeah. So what I was saying, the OBJ matchup, that's something returning to the Giants. When you look at these other matchups, are there any ones that jump out at you? Just initially outside of obviously division rivals, but any other games that are interesting to you for the Giants?
Yeah, I mean, and we're probably going to talk at length during our podcast, but the Cincinnati Bengals game to me feels like the most interesting game for the Giants on the schedule. Right? We know we're going to be competitive within the division. We know the Tampa Bay Bucks are coming and Tom Brady's coming. Those are great storylines. But in terms of the schedule and the announcement, I think the Bengals game is actually the most important on the schedule. And I say that because, they've handed the keys over to number one rookie quarterback, Joe Burrow. And theoretically, you want to get a rookie as early as you possibly can into the season, knowing he doesn't know the speed of the NFL. He doesn't know the schemes. I just look at it like if the Giants can get him earlier in the year as opposed to week 12 or 13 when he's got 10 games under his belt and he's feeling relatively confident, I think that's the difference between potentially a winner or a loss for the Giants.
Yeah, 100%. I was doing a little bit of coverage earlier, stuff that we won't really do in the same way on the podcast or even here right now. But in terms of when do you want to catch certain teams, some teams you think about they're going to be who they're going to be at the beginning of the end. So if they're just a tougher opponent, the Ravens, the 49ers, teams like that, they're going to probably be the same thing. So from that standpoint, well, let's hope that we see them later when maybe we develop a little bit more. Likewise for like the Redskins, okay, that's that toss-up. But the Bengals are the kind of team that you don't know what they could look like, even just from an offensive perspective, by week 7, week 8, week 10, right? So the Giants hopefully catching some of these teams in the earlier phase of the season is going to be the difference between how the record could look for the Giants by the end of the year. Like timing is going to be everything for this team.
Yeah, and listen, it's our job to pontificate. I don't want to speculate. I don't want to go too crazy, but it is kind of funny. Like think of some of the scenarios where there are indications and there are rumblings that it's going to be a division game potentially week 1. It's going to line up potentially with the Dallas Cowboys yet again. And if they do, imagine there's a scenario where, Dak's like, I played and I've done everything I can to earn a long-term deal. And he pulls an Emmitt Smith where he sits out the first 2 games of the year until Jerry's like, what did I do? We got to pay Dak Prescott,
Pulls a Zeke Elliott.
Right. I mean, I just think about there's these scenarios where, like you said, timing is everything. And, with the Dallas Cowboys, playing them earlier might be better than playing them later if it's guaranteed, if there's still some uncertainty at the quarterback position. And I think, like I said, the Bengals to me is a huge swing game. Knowing that it's going to be an away game, if we could get them, the first 4 games of the season, I'd be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, when you start to break it down to those chunks, right? First quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and the final quarter of the year, I think the way you'd like to catch it is kind of, to your point, some of these teams you think could be stronger by the end of it, catch them in that first pocket, especially if there's a sense that Dallas could be the first game. You already know it's going to be a difficult matchup out of the gate. And then really in those middle 2 quarters, the second and third quarters of the season, that's where I'd like to see, throw in the Ravens, maybe get the 49ers mixed in there, because we're hopefully going to be at our best by the end of the year. And so if you're going to take some lumps, you might as well take them in the middle when you're still trying to get over that hump there. Hopefully get it mixed in maybe around a favorable bye week where you get some extra rest. And then at the back end of the year, I'm okay if it's divisional matchups and there's an opportunity to maybe make some noise by winning those games, but you'd hate to be staring down, last 3 weeks of the season, and you get the Ravens, you get the 49ers, and I mean, even say, I don't know, Steelers, the Seahawks, just one of those games you're like, oh, and Seahawks on the road. How about that? That's the last 3 games of the season when you felt like, oh, maybe we were, in the area of 500 or 7 wins, some type of benchmark for this team that'd be really exciting, and you just have to look at this gauntlet.
Well, and you mentioned another one. I mean, granted, the Giants only have 16 games, but another one that's interesting is the away game against the Seattle Seahawks. Their home field advantage is one of the best in the league, if not the best, with all the 12th man, right? And if you're saying we get them early on in the season where fans aren't allowed in the stadium, how much of a disadvantage are the Seahawks at against the Giants, right? Like they feed and thread off that. I remember, this is probably 10 years ago, there was something like 8 or 9 false starts for the New York Giants against the Seattle Seahawks when we went to Seattle the last time we played. And it was because Eli couldn't hear. He was like, I can't hear what's going on. And when you take away that advantage of, 5 yards here or there, sometimes it was multiple false starts in the same series, that's a huge advantage for them that might get taken away if you're playing them early on in the season.
Yeah, that's the Steelers is a team that I looked at that way, even though at home, right? So Seahawks just feels like if you're playing them on the road, there's that potential issue. And you bring a really good about crowd noise. There is a crowd versus what time of year you play them at potentially. The Steelers are another one of those teams. Like, I mean, listen, the Rams are out there as well as a road game, but where are the Rams going to be? Like, they've taken some steps back here this past season. Are they leveling off to rise back up? Or are they maybe taking another little step back? Is Goff the answer? There are all those kind of questions that are maybe around there. What's happening with their running back situation, et cetera? Steelers, same kind of team, right? They muddle their way through a season, and then all of a sudden the back end are around 500 and knocking at the playoff door like they always are. Mike Tomlin, you're still going to have Roethlisberger there. Like, these are those weird games. Those are the teams I don't know what they are. Like, you won't know until you get a couple sample size, right? Some of the other teams I'm like, well, I know the 49ers are a problem. Like, you can check those boxes off. I know what the Cowboys are going to be, but there's a handful of games on this schedule, depending on where they break out, where you go, well, I won't know who they are until week 5 or 6, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the names that just sticks out that you keep talking about is the Pittsburgh Steelers. We get them at home, which is great. Ben Roethlisberger is one of those guys where, if healthy, he could be the comeback player of the year this year, right? He puts up MVP-like numbers, on offense sometimes. Mm-hmm. He's tough in the pocket. He would be an interesting test for a young defense. I think the way that I'm looking at the schedule, there's certainly games that I want played a little bit later on in the year. Even though Tom Brady's been accustomed to playing in Foxborough for a while, I like to get Tampa probably later on in the year than earlier in the year. I don't know why. Yeah, you know what it is? It's just like warm weather team. It's 80 and sunny all day there, and then they fly to New York, and it's abysmal weather, and it's like 15 degrees, and they're like, we don't practice in this, we don't play in this. Like, if Brady's the only guy that really has experienced that, I feel like that's a slight advantage for the Giants, and I'll take that advantage over Tom Brady getting acclimated to his teammates.
Well, I was going to say, because when I ran through it on Sportscaster earlier, I tried to run. I'm like, oh, how would I want these clumps to break down? And it's worth getting into now, because once it releases, it'll all be moved. I said by like week 6, because you just mentioned it. I'd rather play the Bucs maybe before they get settled in. And the other thing was too that I thought about. Remember that Bucs defense was supposed to be good, came out really bad, and then by the end of the season, though, was starting to get itself on track. So there's some sense of these teams too that I look at our own team and say, the defense may need a little bit of time to get itself into a rhythm. I think we got a lot of nice pieces now. The offense, I would expect to be ready to go, more immediately. So now I start to think about, well, when would I rather see some of these teams? And I don't know. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg. Do you want to face the Bucs with a high-powered offense that's in rhythm by the end of the year when the defense is a little stronger for us? Or do I want to roll the dice on a potential shootout early in the year when maybe Tom doesn't quite have the rhythm yet, when maybe Gronk is still coming out of the fog of retirement, So I feel like there's two sides to every one of these matchup coins. And when I started laying out where these clumps went, I ran myself into such a wall by the back end of the schedule. And I'll point this out because I said it earlier, saying, oh, well, the 49ers and the Ravens, put it wherever because those are going to be bad matchups. The only caveat would be maybe by the end of the year, their games don't matter as much. Right? Maybe by weeks 14, 15, 16, 17, they may be locked in potentially to a playoff spot, and they don't need, they can rest Lamar Jackson for a game if they so chose when we're trying to grab out a win. So that's another facet too.
Well, as a general rule of thumb, and I think this has been around for quite a while, week 17 is always divisional games because they want to make sure that teams are competing for, the crown of the NFC East or whatever it is. They get a chance to match up against each other. So we know that that's not going to happen in week 17 with either 15, of those.
16, yeah.
Yeah, but even 15, 16, like, are we saying that San Francisco is going to be 4 games ahead of Seattle going into week 15? Like, that would be a huge, like, I look at Russell Wilson and I'm like, man, he's one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. Like, he's not going to let them get that far away from them, I don't think. But I do understand your point. Maybe the Ravens are the team of destiny this year, and they're 13-1, and they're cruising along, and the Steelers didn't pick anything up, and maybe Cleveland looks like Cleveland of last year, and they're 6 games ahead. It's like maybe they're not focused, right?
Well, and a very interesting part about that too is what was Cleveland supposed to be last year, right? Versus what they ended up being. I feel like that's a team. Everyone just still looking at it and says, wow, look at all these weapons and everything. They fixed the offensive. They improved the offensive line even with Conklin in the offseason. Like, that team, all of a sudden, that division can get a lot even more so congested this upcoming year potentially, and that can pull some teams back to the pack where everyone, to your point, is still scrapping and fighting by the back end of the year.
Well, and the other thing about the schedule that I found fascinating, and this will be a moot point in the next minute or two, but, strength of schedule, they basically said the Giants have the 7th easiest schedule going into next season, and they're basing it off of last year. And when you think about the teams that the Giants are playing and the movement that's been made, like, you could make a case that, like, the teams are drastically different than where they finished. Pittsburgh finished 8-8 without Ben Roethlisberger. That's that one you could say they probably win a couple more games potentially. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had Jameis Winston. Now they have Tom Brady, and they're loaded, right? Mm-hmm. You look at the Cincinnati Bengals. They were a dreadful team. It's why they got the number 1 pick. They just drafted a franchise-changing quarterback. It's like, so when we look at these win percentages of teams, Cleveland might have had one of the best off seasons on paper of anyone we saw, getting even more help for Baker Mayfield, especially along the offensive line. Look at Kyler Murray got DeAndre Hopkins. Are we saying that these teams are the same that they were? And, when teams increase in value or look to be better than they were, then there's decreases in other places. So to me, like, I don't know, the Giants schedule does not look as easy as people are trying to paint it out to be.
Ladies and gentlemen, so as you finish completing that conversation, and that's a very good point that you bring up, the schedule is officially been released. The Giants will have preseason matchups with the Jets, Titans, Packers, and, of course, finishing it off with the Patriots, as that has become a tradition, along with the Jets game as well. The Giants will open the season at home against the Pittsburgh Steelers to start off the year. So no Dallas Cowboy reckoning at the beginning of the year. We're going to move over and get into our podcast here, but we'll run through this entire lineup. So following it up with week 2 on the 20th, they'll take on the Chicago Bears. That will be a road game. They'll come back home, and then San Francisco will have to travel across country to take us on back in New Jersey. We'll pick up the Rams in week 4 there on October 4th. Week 5, we'll bring the Dallas Cowboys. That will be the road matchup. So the first divisional matchup will come week 5. We turn around and come home on the 18th to have another divisional matchup against the Redskins, followed by the away game against the Eagles on a short turnaround. So that looks like that'll be a Thursday night game there that we'll be having. So 3 games in a row, 2 away with a home game sandwich between their divisional matchups. They'll finish out the first half of the season on November 2nd against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So that's actually going to come off of a bye week there. So that means that we have, in fact, a week 8 bye. And then we'll come back in week 9 against the Bucs at home. Follow that up with a road game against the Redskins, home for the Eagles. And then you're going to get the – let me make sure I have that right when that bye week lands. But then you're going to get –
So Adam, the Thursday night
long
game
layoff there is
it's a longer layoff. They get the Bucs at home. The bye week is until a little bit later in the season.
Yeah, so after they take the Eagles on at home on the 15th, then they'll get their bye week. So that's coming, week 11 for them. So that's pretty good. You might like to have a little bit sooner given the early, the messed up schedule we're going to have in the offseason here. But then they'll after the bye week take on the Bengals on the road, Seahawks on the road, then home for a fairly late season matchup with that Cardinals team you just mentioned, followed by another home matchup against the Cleveland Browns. And then they'll go on the road to Baltimore and close out the season against the division rival Dallas Cowboys at home. So before we move fully into it, just what's your take? What's your brief synopsis of what you're looking at here? Give me the
So I really don't like the way that this sets up for the Giants. At first glance, I look at this and say, this is not how we wanted this thing to set up at all. I mean, if you want me to start with the positives, starting at home on Monday Night Football against Ben Roethlisberger, he's been off for almost a year. Maybe you don't know what he's going to give. I guess that's a positive. I'm looking at the rest of the schedule and I'm saying, man, we get the Bengals way later in the year than I wanted to. We have to go to Seattle way later in the year where there's definitely going to be fans. To me, this schedule does not.
Ravens week 16. Maybe we do dodge a bullet there. That's the second to last week of the season. So maybe something that, like we talked about before. I'm looking for some silver linings here. I'm concerned about the Cleveland Browns. That means that they're probably going to be, as on all cylinders as possible by the time you meet them December 20th. The Cardinals is another one that's pushed into later this season. Feels like that'll be a rhythm game for them as well. So there's some concerns here. I would have liked as well, just at a glance, I would have liked a couple more. I actually like the idea of having 3 out of your last 4 games be in division, right? Where you can really affect the standings and just have some of those rivalries go on. So, we close out the season against the Cowboys, but then prior to that, a lot of that damage gets done early in the year, and the Eagles game going all the way back to just before the bye week there, that's going to be the, week 10 matchup. That's the last time that we'll see a division rival all the way until the end of the year. So, listen, we've got some dissecting to do. I had said it earlier on the Sportscaster stream, the impact that the way this schedule laid out could direct the wins and loss expectations here. We're going to start to click over into the podcast recording session. We'll say a fond farewell to the YouTube followers that we've been slowly building up over there as we dip our toe into the tube waters. And now we'll close out there and then fire off on our podcast episode, which will immediately get released as soon as we're done wrapping it. So by about 8:30, this thing will be out with full dissection. Maybe a little bit after that, depending on how excited Andy and I get talking about this schedule. But it's going to be ready for everyone to check out. So head over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts by around 8:30, 8:45, we'll say.